Senator from Kentucky.
We're gathered here to talk about the budget. We're going to be voting on a budget resolution shortly, and I'm concerned. I'm concerned that there's so much enthusiasm among conservatives and Republicans for cutting waste and cutting fraud and quit spending $2 million on sex changes in Guatemala and $3 million on girl-centric climate change in Brazil, $4.8 million on social media influencers in Ukraine. I'm excited by eliminating all of that waste. I've been calling for it for years. But I'll tell you what worries me. What worries me is that so many things in Washington are smoke and mirrors. On the one hand, it appears as if all of this great savings is happening. But on the other hand, the resolution before us will increase the debt by $5 trillion. So which is it? Are we cutting spending or are we expanding the debt? If we expand the debt at $5 trillion, that will be an expansion of the debt equal to or exceeding everything that happened in the Biden years. Now, which is it? I thought we had an election. And the other side is complaining loudly that, oh my goodness, there's going to be too much cut in spending. And our side is saying, no, no, no. And I'm looking at the numbers. The budget resolution is going to add $5 trillion over about a 2-year period. So they're going to add more than $2 trillion a year to the debt. In what world is that conservative? They say there is a difference between the parties, and yet when you look at the numbers, when you look at the fact that this budget resolution is going to borrow $5 trillion, you scratch your head and say, what's up here? Is there somebody not really being honest with us? They're going to borrow $5 trillion. And yet they'll say, well, the spending is coming down, and we've put these numbers in the budget that will reduce spending. If so, why are we borrowing $5 trillion? The reason they're going to ask the Republicans and the Democrats, but it'll be mostly Republicans voting for this debt, the reason they're asking for it is because they're anticipating that's what they'll need. They're also anticipating that, it's kind of embarrassing, really, to talk about debt. It's extremely embarrassing for Republicans who say they're conservative to be adding $5 trillion in debt and voting for it. So they don't want to do it very often. Let's try to spread it out a long time. Let's try to get through the 2026 election. Let's try to get to 2027 before we have to have this embarrassment brought back in front of us. But the embarrassment and the shame is coming much quicker. We're going to get to the end of September 30th. That's the end of the fiscal year for our federal government. And the American people at that time will be told, hopefully someone in the media notices this, that the deficit for this year will be over $2 trillion. The estimates are that there will be about $2.2 trillion. And we're going to borrow $5 trillion. Now, some would argue, yeah, but we need to give them a chance. We need to give them a chance because the spending number actually looks like they might reduce spending. But here's the problem. The spending number is lower, but this bill also adds $325 billion in new spending, $150 billion for the military-industrial complex, another $175 billion for the border, but that's new money. How much money did we spend last year? A little over $7 trillion. But that's not enough, according to all the people here on my side today that are going to vote for this budget. They want more than last year. Well, if last year was $7.1 trillion, that must mean they're going to want $300 billion more than that. But the number in the bill says, no, $6.5 trillion. So they're saying, no, we're going to spend less. I say, you know what? I've seen the way this place operates, and I don't trust either party. Why? Because I've seen the deficit and the debt grow and triple since I've been here. It's $36 trillion. Now, I voted against every last penny of it. I've voted against the spending bills. I've voted to balance the budget. I've introduced budgets that balance over 5 years. But the one thing that would happen, even if I had my way and I could introduce and my budget would be accepted, there'd have to be some debt accumulation. So what I'm offering today is let's accumulate some debt. Let's raise the debt ceiling. Never voted for this before, but I'm willing to vote for 3 months, about $500 billion to raise the debt ceiling. Why? Because it has to happen. Why don't I want to give them $5 trillion? Because then you're just turning your back and they're going to do whatever they always do. What does the swamp always do? Take your money, borrow money, spend and borrow. It continues unabated. But if you wanted to keep your Congress on a leash, if you wanted to have leverage, to say, well, what if you're not being honest with me? What if in 3 months the deficit's over $2 trillion? And what if in 3 months the spending levels aren't $6.5 trillion, but in actuality $7.4 trillion? How would we then rebuke you? How would we stop you? How would we stop the spending? Well, the way we would stop the spending is by not giving you any more borrowing. So what I'm proposing today is an amendment that will raise the debt ceiling by $500 billion. To me, that's an extraordinary amount of money, but your government spends it so darn fast that that's about 3 months worth of spending. But there's nothing conservative about raising the debt ceiling $5 trillion. It boggles the mind to try to comprehend how anyone who is self-describing themselves as conservative would vote to increase the debt by $5 trillion. It makes utterly no sense. But it also is free rein for the spenders because they've got $5 trillion they can spend. In recent years, on occasion, they haven't even put a number in there. Probably the only reason we're getting a number is because the rules of the budget require a number. But what they've been doing, both parties, they've been just saying, well, why don't we just borrow money for 2 years or 3 years? And many people argue, many on the other side of the aisle say, we shouldn't even have these votes at all. Why have a debt ceiling at all? Let's just let it spin out of control. Has anybody ever seen the debt clock? Go to the debtclock.org and watch the numbers spinning wildly out of control. Now, some will say deficits don't matter. This was the Cheney family. Dick Cheney famously said deficits don't matter. But the thing is, they really do, because you have to pay interest on the debt. We're paying about $1 trillion in interest. So the largest item in our spending now, bigger than our military, is actually the interest. Over the next 10 years, we're going to pay about $14 trillion in interest. I think it's actually probably worse than that. That's what the estimates are now, but it is literally out of control. And you say to yourself, how would we rein in spending? You have to look at everything. Every item we spend money on has to be looked at. You have to look across the board at everything. But what we have is the current administration says we're not going to look at Social Security, despite what the other side says about Social Security. Nothing's going to happen to Social Security. They're not going to fix it. They're not going to make it better. They're not going to reduce anything. Social Security is going to be untouched. So is Medicare. But then there are reports and complaints saying, well, we shouldn't touch Medicaid either. And then people say, food stamps, we can't touch food stamps. Well, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps comprise all the money that comes into our government. They're about $5 trillion worth. That's about what we pay in taxes. So the government brings in about $5 trillion and spends $7 trillion. It's about a $2 trillion overdraft. We're $2 trillion in the hole every year, and we're up to about $36, $37 trillion total. But how would we actually get there if you're taking off the table Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and food stamps? Those 4 items are about $5 trillion, pretty close to it. So if you take all the entitlements off the table, what are you left with? And people love and they get excited about the terrible foreign aid. I do too. I think it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's the most egregious of the spending. It's the easiest to cut. But I forced a vote on that 2 weeks ago, and we got no Democrat votes. In fact, I don't think there is a Democrat in Congress who will vote to cut 1 penny. I'd like to do that sometime, introduce a bill to cut a penny or to cut $1 to see if they would. Let's cut $1 from the $2 million that they spend doing sex change surgery in Guatemala with U.S. tax dollars. Will the Democrats support a bill to cut $1? Probably not. They would probably insist, even if they admitted the program was egregious or horrible or out of normalcy, they would probably insist the money be spent somewhere else. And that's sort of the debate we have over time. I have a bill called Bonuses for cost cutters, which says that if you are in charge of a budget for government, let's say you're in charge of $12 million at the Department of Energy, if you save $1 million, you would actually get a personal bonus for the federal employee as an incentive. When I put this forward, the main complaint that usually comes from across the aisle is they're okay with giving federal workers bonuses for saving money, but they insist that the money not go back to the Treasury. This is the big debate that's going on also. What Elon Musk has done and Doge has done is absolutely commendable, and we need more of it. The whole place is rotten and it needs to be shaken up, and we need to look for waste. But there's going to be another debate. Is that waste going to come back, and are we going to vote on it? Are we going to codify it? Are we going to make it real by lowering our numbers? But the only way we would have any leverage on either party is by only giving them a little taste of the money. Don't give them so much money they're wallowing in it and it comes out as fast as the Federal Reserve can print it. Give them about 3 months worth. Let's see how they do in 3 months. If the spending totals that are in the bill come forward in 3 months, and those are the spending totals that Congress approves, I'd be pretty satisfied with that. In fact, I've told them the bill on large, I'm for continuing the tax cuts. I'm for keeping the tax cuts permanent. I voted for them in 2017. I'm for reducing spending, which on the surface, some of the numbers look better. But I'm just not for borrowing $5 trillion. If we're doing a good job, if we're doing a better job, why are we borrowing $5 trillion? Something doesn't add up. Something is fishy. If we're going to do such a good job, and if we have transformed government, if we are different than the other side of the aisle, and we really are for less spending and less debt, why are we borrowing more money than we've ever borrowed at one time in the history of the country? This will set a record. I believe $5 trillion will be the most that's ever been borrowed in one fell swoop. This will be a vote, and I think an ignominious one, in which professed conservatives stand up, stand forward, and vote for more debt than Congress has ever voted for at one period of time. It just disappoints me. I'm so disappointed. But I'm also disappointed because I think within a few months, when the American people see this, particularly when Republicans at home see, oh my goodness, I heard all this good news about cutting foreign aid and cutting all this crazy spending around the world, but the deficit's still $2 trillion this year. And then they're going to scratch their heads, and maybe they give the Republicans another 6 months to look. And then they're going to find that another $1 trillion has been borrowed in another 6 months. And they're going to find we're 2 years into a new Republican administration with a Republican majority in the Senate and a Republican majority in the House, and we're going to borrow $5 trillion. Something doesn't add up here. Someone needs to stand up and say something. Someone needs to give conservatives, if we have conservatives in this body, an alternative. That's what my amendment will be. My amendment will be an alternative. Instead of borrowing $5 trillion, sticking our head in the sand and saying, oh, please be nice to us and do what you promised and spend less money. No, we give them 3 months and we say, prove to us that you will, for the first time, adhere to your word. And it isn't just a couple individual people. This is the history of the institution. Occasionally, through the last several decades, there have been people come forward and they put forth rules. There was Graham-Rudman-Hollings. There were different rules that said you have to pay as you go. So if somebody brought up $300 billion in new spending, you'd have to cut $300 billion from somewhere else. But you know what's happened? These things have been evaded time and time again. Why are people like me cynical of the process? Why do people like me not believe them when they say they're going to cut spending? Because they've always gone back on their word. They exempt themselves from the rules they create. Graham-Rudman-Hollings, pay-as-you-go, would have been effective, but it's been evaded by Congress 60, 70 times now. So I say trust but verify. I say trust, accept your colleagues if they say they're really going to do this, but give them 3 months worth of borrowing. Don't give them 2 years worth of borrowing. Don't give $5 trillion. Don't put yourself on record. Today, if this is passed, or tomorrow morning early, if this is passed, Republicans who vote for this will be on record as being more fiscally liberal than their counterparts. They will vote to borrow more money than the Democrats have ever borrowed. So there really is a disconnect here. Something is not as it appears. There is a smoke and mirrors. There is this great enthusiasm across the land for what is happening, and I share that. I share President Trump's desire to balance the budget. I'm pleased with his cabinet. I'm super pleased with having Elon Musk and Doge and these young people look for waste. I'm for all of that and more. But if it's going to be reflected in something, we have to borrow less. If we're still borrowing the same amount, maybe it isn't real. Maybe we're just talking about things and we're not actually doing them. It is hard to cut spending. Everybody wants something. Everybody wants something from government. But there is no such thing as something for nothing. It has to come from somewhere. Most people know this in their daily lives. As you work, you get something for work and you feel good about yourself because you've worked for something. You can't simply just hand out money to people. You can't print up money like it grows on trees. But I can tell you there's an absolute historical record of abuse by both parties. But what saddens me in particular for Republicans is Republicans will go on record today to increase the debt more than the Democrats ever had. The new world's record for accumulation of debt, the new world record for expanding debt in our country will belong to the Republican Party with this. This is a sad day. I will vote against this bill and object to it unless we get rid of this enormous amount of borrowing. If we get rid of the $5 trillion and adopt my amendment, I'll vote for the bill. The bill would borrow, if my amendment were passed, $500 billion. Is it enough? No, we'd have to do it again. We'd come back in 3 months. But this is the idea of trust but verify. If the promises are real, and if the big spenders in both parties are doing a good job, when they come back and prove to us that they've actually done something they have never done in the past, they have changed their ways, and they're not going to keep adding massive debts year after year, then we give them another 3 months. If they do a great job, maybe we give them 6 months. But we don't give big spenders in Washington who have a terrible history with the debt, we don't give them no leash at all, no controls at all. $5 trillion here, spend it however you want. We don't do that. At least we profess not to on our side. So my amendment will give all members of the body a chance to say, do you want continued oversight of your government by looking at the debt ceiling periodically, or you just want to wash your hands? I say if we wash our hands, we speed up the demise of our country. I think now is an inflection point. The stock market in the last 2 days lost over $6 trillion. We live in perilous times, and I think the people who just keep going on their merry way saying, we'll just do the same thing, and we'll tell the people it's a little different than the other side. Maybe they'll vote for us this time, maybe they won't. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the people are frustrated. I think the people are annoyed. And I think the people are frankly worried. The people who have been trying to save and are getting closer to retirement are looking at their retirement nest egg and saying, oh my goodness, look what's happened to us. Where are we going? Part of that message is an indictment of tariffs that I think millions of investors think tariffs are a bad idea. But part of it's an indictment over our massive accumulation of debt. The fact that we're spending $7 trillion and bringing in $5 trillion. So I hope the body will consider my amendment, and maybe I'll be shocked. Maybe we'll get enough votes from both sides of the aisle to actually have a shorter leash and have more perspective and more concern and oversight for what our spending will do. So I recommend a yes vote on my amendment, which will change the debt ceiling from $5 trillion to $500 billion.